This audio file is a production of the Divinity School, the graduate professional school for the academic study of religion at the University of Chicago. Visit us online at divinity.uchicago.edu.
So I have a few announcements to make. First of all, welcome to the Fall Craft of Teaching Seminar. The Craft Teaching Seminar is, of course, part of a quarterly series that is within the Craft Teaching program, kind of this flagship series within the program. And if you haven't signed in already, please do so at the computer so you have a record of your attendance, especially if you're doctoral students wishing to officially complete the program requirements, you have to have a record of your attendance. But also, if you're master's students or any other degree programs, it's handy for us to know who has been here, and it's handy in case you're asking for recommendations or you pursue doctoral studies, the events that you attended as a master's student, you can continue to count towards that. So please do sign in. In a moment, I'll turn it over to Dean Mitchell to introduce our invited guest today. But first, I want to highlight a few upcoming events and things that we just added recently to the calendar. Most immediately next week, Ann Knappel, who is a religion bibliographer, will be doing a session on teaching religion in the internet age, electronic resources in the religious studies classroom. And that will be next Thursday, November 1st at 3 o'clock from 3 to 4:30 in the Regenstein 207, which is near your current periodical. And so she'll help us think a little bit about how our students might be engaging electronic resources and internet resources while they're taking your classes, and how we can better help them engage those resources and think critically and thoughtfully about them. No RSVP is required. And then a couple of exciting events that we've recently added to the calendar that's not reflected on the website yet, but will be shortly, is November 15th. The Religion and Ethics Workshop will be bringing in Professor Charles Matthews, who is a Divinity School alumnus and Professor of Religious Studies at the University of Virginia. And he'll be talking on teaching religion and the danger of becoming Don Juan of myths. And that's Thursday, November 15th at 4:30 in Swift 200. And then another recent added event, January 24th, the Religion and Literature Club is bringing in Professor Jennifer Oldstone Moore, who is Professor of Religion, specializing in Chinese religions at Wittenberg University. And she is a member of the Association of Contemplative Mind in Higher Education. And she will be talking with us about contemplative practice and how that might serve as a resource for us as teachers of religion. Interesting program on January 24th. And then finally, in case you haven't heard, we have announced the winter and spring craft of teaching seminar leaders, and those will be in the winter our own Professor Jonathan B. Smith. And after that seminar, we will have a reception in his honor, in honor of a forthcoming collection of essays that is being published by Oxford University Press called On Teaching Religion. And then in the spring, our invited guest will be the alumnus of the year, Michael Kinnaman, who has done a lot of things in his career, but is presently a visiting professor of interreligious dialogue at Seattle University at the School of Theology and Ministry. So those will be the upcoming winter and spring. So do check our website for all the events. And I will also do my best to get out our events on the weekly announcements at the Divinity School, the announcements that come out of the Dean Student's office. I want to take a moment before I turn over to Dean Mitchell for all of you to introduce yourselves briefly. So please say your name and the degree program that you're in.
I'm Willa Lidgell. I'm a PhD student in religious ethics. Tish Duncan in biblical studies.
Bobby Steinhardt, I'm a master's student in Humanities.
I'm a PhD student in history of religion. I'm Alex Rocco, I'm a PhD student in history of religion.
David Mahal, the PhD student in history of Christianity. And just as a tidbit, in AAR SPL San Diego, I had the pleasure of talking to Professor Raphael after a session on the Bible in public education. I remember we talked for like 30 minutes, I think.
My name is Ross Johnson. I'm a PhD in philosophy of religions.
I'm Gary Honduras. I'm second year PhD in theology.
I'm Colin Sarkovic, I'm the second semester.
Robin Payne, MA program Hebrew Bible.
Kyle Whitaker, PhD student in history of Christianity.
Jean Cicero, PhD in Religion and Literature.
Randy Burton, PhD in Religion and Literature.
Crystal Flavel, PhD in Religious Ethics.
John Howell, PhD in Religion and Lit.
Joshua Daniel, PhD in Theology.
Alexandra Zergel, PhD in History.
Michael Chevalier, PhD in Religious Ethics.
Andrew Langford, PhD in New Testament and Early Christian Literature.
I'm Jonathan Sawyers, also a PhD student in New Testament and Early Christian Literature.
I'm John Moreski, MA in Bible.
Chris Hamlin, Masters of Divinity.
I'm Marianne Montelupa, I'm PhD student in Theology.
Margaret Mitchell, Bible area and History of Christianity area faculty. Sid?
I'm
Go back
Zachary,
there.
I'm a PhD student in History of Judaism.
I'm Jeffrey Stafford, I teach Hebrew Bible.
Richard Rosengarten, I try to teach religion and literature.
Lisa Lena, I'm a PhD in Theology. I'm Catherine Flom, I'm a PhD in Religion and Literature. I'm Allison Davis, I'm also a PhD in Religion and Literature.
I'm Megan Freitag, and I'm a Master of Divinity student.
I'm Bethany Lowry, and I'm currently moving over to the newly minted Religions in America area.
There are a couple of seats up here, and if you want to get closer, but as long as you're comfortable, we're comfortable. Before I have the pleasure of introducing Professor Rebecca Raphael, let me just say a few words very briefly about the craft of teaching. That's the name both of our pedagogical program, and it's the name in particular of the Dean's Seminar on the Craft of Teaching. When we talked about this among the task force that's been at work for 2 years, Professor Stafford, Dean of Students Terry Owens, Professor Lucy Pick, and myself, at one point we had this little jargon thing about, well, we wanted to have a master teacher seminar. None of us really liked that language, aside from the dominatrix or the quality of it. Also, it's just that pedagogically we didn't really buy it. That is, that there isn't such a thing as mastering teaching. Teaching is always different depending on not just the institute, certainly the institution, certainly the subject, certainly the student, certainly the time of day, certainly the room it's in, certainly the weather, certainly public events. I mean, the teaching is always different every time. And so we picked up on purpose the resonance of a very University of Chicago book by Wayne Booth and Joseph Cullum called The Craft of Research. And so the craft of teaching is the complement to the craft of research. And so that's the genesis of this. Second point and last preliminary, when we've been interfacing with the Center for Teaching and Learning on campus, we've come to the judgment that we couldn't just have, as some units on campus are invited to do, is have a course on pedagogy for the Divinity School. Because it would be impossible to have any single course because the whole point of the course would be, hey, it's really different depending on where you teach. Hey, it's really different depending on whether you teach history of religions or religions in America. Hey, it's really different whether you are a social scientist in terms of your basic methodological orientation, or a literary scholar, or someone in constructive studies interested in religious ethics and other kinds of normative arguments. So we decided that what was most important was that you, as the educators in the study of religion in this country, be exposed to the wide variety of perspectives and of contexts and expertise. And where do we go for that? Our own alumni. There are more of them teaching in higher education, as well as in other contexts, such as the Park Avenue Synagogue in New York City, and with Michael Kinnaman as the director of the National Council of Churches. Our alumni are teaching all over the country and all over the world. So pulling them back to the mothership, is that a better image than dominatrix or the master teacher? Bringing them back to Hyde Park to say, help us learn from you, from your experience. And I was saying to Rebecca, thus far, everyone I've invited has accepted within about 12 hours. They've all said they're excited to be a part of the program, and most of them have said, how come you didn't have something like that when I was there? So we hope to learn and learn into the future. Professor Raphael is Associate Professor of Philosophy and Distinguished Teaching Professor in the Humanities at Texas State University, San Marcos. Professor Raphael received the Bachelor of Science degree from Northwestern University in Speech Performance Studies and a Master of Arts and PhD at the University of Chicago from the Divinity School in Religion and Literature in 1997. Her dissertation was entitled Divine Word, Divine Song, Inspiration and Authority in Hesiod and in the First Isaiah. Professor Raphael is the author of a monograph entitled Biblical Corpora, Representations of Disability in Hebrew Biblical Literature, published by T&T Clark in 2008. And among multiple essays in collected volumes and refereed journals, I want to highlight just 2 or 3. Dad and I are really good friends.
No, I'm always worried we put something.
Yeah. Well, I'm close enough to pinch, Rebecca, so don't work me off. Monsters in the Crippled Cosmos. Construction of the Other as an Anomalous Body in 4th Ezra, 2010. Madly Disobedient, the representation of madness in Handel's oratorio, Saul. That's no literature, that's my Bible. on James Kugel's objections to the idea of biblical poetry. We're extremely excited to hear from Professor Raphael today about her context, about specific courses, and in particular about the project she's engaged in as Distinguished Teaching Professor in designing a major in religious studies in her context. So please join me in welcoming Rebecca Raphael back to the
Thank you, Dean Mitchell, and I'd like to be here. And Brandon's been very helpful in setting this up, so I think you can thank. I'm unique with all this master teaching, because I'm still surprised that many folks think I know anything about teaching. But maybe I do. Let me tell you first about my context. Texas State is a large, comprehensive public university that's been rapidly changing since I started working there in 1999. I think 14 years ago, the total enrollment was about 21,000, and it's now 34,000. It's undergone a name change from former Southwest Texas State University. And with that, changes in composition and, to an extent, mission. In the time I've been there, it achieved federal designation as a Hispanic serving institution, which was a significant goal of the current president. The university has recently sought to bring in more students from out of state. There's a larger contingent of international students than one would expect. I still hope to see more students from other parts of the U.S. one day. I work in a philosophy department and was hired to anchor a religious studies minor that was newly created by the department when the search to led to my project was in progress. It's a list of courses, and the minor has a structure other than the 18 items on this list. Some of them are field courses, many religious studies, and several courses from 5 or 6 different departments in the university. Curricular change came with the job. The 5 religious studies courses that existed when I was hired had been inherited from what I think of as the Bible chair period, more on that in a moment. Somebody might know what that means. And only one of them was eligible for normal state funding, and that was one called comparative religions. The other 4 were regarded as not acceptably academic to be funded by the state of Texas. So the department wanted me to rewrite those courses so that they would all be regular academic courses and funded in the usual manner. So I found myself doing course proposals in my first semester. with the assistance of my chair. Still, it was, looking back, I'm surprised that I was asked to do what I did very early on in terms of changing the curriculum. You'll find local histories are important, and it takes a while to learn them. So I wanted to tell you a little bit about the local history, but I wasn't aware of when I first started. There's an agency that still exists, I believe it's a nonprofit, that funds what have been called Bible chairs. The way this existed in Texas and some other states for decades in the 20th century. The organization would help fund staff for Bible courses in public universities, but those staff were selected usually by local religious denominations. They did not go through the normal process for hiring faculty, and the students could take them for college credit. In 1985, the University of North Texas, north of Dallas, petitioned to establish a religious studies major under its philosophy department, and the philosophy faculty with the Bible chairs. And when this reached the state board level, someone got nervous about constitutional issues, rightly so, I think. Asked the Attorney General of the state, Jim Mancox, to make a, what do you call Attorney General opinion ruling? They're not legally binding, but they are advisory on whether the Bible chair was acceptable. And in a 6-page opinion that I found rather interesting, he said no. And in particular noted the unusual means by which these courses were staffed, that they were, the instructors of them were not hired as professors would be in any other part of the university, like some other problems as well. Chilling effect throughout Texas public universities. All the universities have had any kind of religion courses, and usually inclusive Bible chairs, just drop them immediately. I did some research in the archival undergraduate catalogs, and you just see everything disappear. When the catalog was in effect in 1985, and the one that comes into effect in 86. Then in the 90s, there was a little bit of creep, what to call it, went back to having something. Now, in some cases, including my local case, the minister who'd been teaching Bible chair courses was just rehired and graduating to teach these Bible courses. And that was under the English department. And in 1998, English decided, for reasons I'm not inquired into, that they did not want these courses anymore, and philosophy said, we'll take them and do something with it. So I found out later that my hire was the result of a search committee that was seeking someone who was unimpeachably academic. But they meant that in a good way. So that's a local history, and that's been the context for both for the specific, for the specific courses I teach, for the curricula development I've already done, for the quest for a major, some better organization and more extensive curriculum, right? And also for my communication, not just with students, but with colleagues and administrators and the community about religious studies. Here's what I teach. Obviously, religious studies courses, and for a long time, until very recently, I was the only person in the university with that specialization. That's changed in the past couple of years, so it's nice to have colleagues finally. I also teach philosophy intros, and these are required of all undergraduates in the university. I teach honors courses. These are interdisciplinary and draw on a student body that's already been pre-selected by the honors program. And those courses are smaller in enrollment than the others. And I wanted you to know about my outside religious studies teaching, because I think it has influenced how I teach religious studies. Now, one thing that's interesting is that who takes these courses and why varies. For the religious studies courses, even for a minor, they don't have to take any one course yet. So everybody who's in a class is there because they picked that class for whatever reason. when I started, most of those students would be taking it just out of interest as a humanities elective. About 6 years ago, it bumped up to about 2/3 of any given class being religious studies minors, and that has stayed high. The philosophy intro, since those are compulsory, draw a cross-section of the university. And those people did not decide to be my farm. Many of them don't understand why the university forces them to take philosophy. Some find it more interesting than they thought it would be. So I see a wider cross-section of the university in those philosophy intros. When I started teaching honors, it was, frankly, a way for me to get a rest from the difficulties of teaching religious studies. And slowly over the years, religion has crept back in because I can't seem to leave it alone. So, I have some across-the-board observations of the students I have that would apply to all of my classes and many classes that you might encounter in many places in the U.S. We're seeing now the first cohort of students coming in who, if they've been through the public school system, have been through it entirely under No Child Left Behind and similar policies. I don't know enough about the research, but my students have complained about what they had to study, narrowly teaching to the test. And so my main experience with that is anecdotal, and students telling me how they felt about it. Here's what I see. A lack of practice in close, deep reading. The reading skills seem to be about skimming and getting points, and then repackaging those. Secondly, a need for improved writing skills. Now, sometimes this is mechanical, but most students who've got the mechanical aspect of writing down still don't seem well practiced in making arguments, especially in operating interpretations of text. One of the questions I've come to fear most is, do you want our opinion? And I'm afraid of this because I don't really know what it means. I don't know why it's funny either. Here's what's confusing about that to me. I know that I wish I brought in a deck of cards for props, so if you just imagine that. If the cards stand for things other people have already written, and the other category, besides my opinion, is something that just rearranges these cards and puts them across the table to me. I don't want that, because there's not enough individual thought in that kind of rearranging and packaging. On the other hand, I suspect when students say, do you want our opinion, what they mean is the type of writing they probably have to do in high school is to just say, how do you feel about this? And then some document or text just becomes a prompt for a truly personal response. Now, I'm aiming for something in between these, which is disciplined but individual and creative thought in response to documents. So I still haven't figured out how to answer that question. But I view it as a problem in writing instruction. If students are thinking in terms of my opinion versus the report style, the task is teaching them that there's something else and then giving them the tools for accomplishing that. Teaching philosophy is influenced by religious studies teaching, and this has a lot to do with the way the philosophy intros are structured at my university. Critical thinking is an important component, and that primarily involves teaching argumentation, just the idea of premises and conclusions, different types of inference, and what logical fallacies are. And so when I teach philosophy, I do focus on argument and explication of argument. I probably do it more in a history of idea style than my colleagues do, and that's coming from a religious studies background. Another way philosophy is influenced religious studies teaching is, what I have in my book. Let me just read it out. Rethinking philosophical foundations of method, as if Chicago people need any prompting to do that. But nevertheless, additional prompting by teaching philosophy, and in particular, trying to articulate the intellectual foundations of the historical method. Why historical inferences work the way they do, what the alternatives are if we abandon some of the basic rules of historical inference. So I did quite a lot of that in my biblical studies classes. And all that religious studies is not philosophy. I think it's given me, teaching philosophy has given me greater appreciation of everything in religion, but it's not just an idea. You know, all the nitty-gritty of social organizations, practices, rituals, and material stuff. So all these the different facets of my teaching are very mutually influencing. I know that might not be the case for many of you once you're at work. One of my concerns now is that the humanities may shrink such that religious studies may become less independent than it currently is, and that this kind of broad humanities teaching might become more necessary for more religious studies scholars. It may depend on your location. Now, in addition to that, there's the broader teaching, not just the courses, but the curriculum at the macro level, and then the micro level of trying to teach students how to make inferences. And so my short assignments, of which there are a few in this packet, are coming from that. Because when I started, I thought writing an essay was a sufficient instruction, and it was not. So I had to give shorter assignments that would focus on the smaller ingredients that go into it later on. Now, that's my introductory spiel. I'll say a few things about the two courses and then ask for your discussion or comments or questions you have about them, and then close with a discussion of the NIH project and my current attempt to propose a major, which are to stay a bit overlapping. A couple things about these syllabi. When I started, my syllabi were only one page long. And I was a little subconscious about what these syllabi when someone visited me. Become so over the years. That's not a bad word. So part of this syllabi getting long had to do with realizing that I had to say things that I felt went without saying. Some of this had to do with bad behavior. Some of it had to do with students wanting more clear, an answer that would satisfy what do you want. I don't always know the answer to that. Nor is the class reading my mind. So I'm just a little puzzled when they put me in the center in that way. A few years ago, the Texas legislature passed a law requiring all faculty in public universities to post syllabi on the university website within 3 clicks of the home page. So the hieroglyphicism syllabus I gave you was taken right off the public course site. It's not as pretty as what I would like to have shown you, but then I was pressed for time. I thought, no, maybe this is what I slap off at the beginning of this semester in order to comply with state regulations. My university's guidelines for complying with them. And so there are certain requirements for these, in particular the statement of objectives and assessments. What are you aiming at? What are you grade kids on? And the requirement that all sessions be fully mapped out. Because what I've been doing before that, what I still do secretly, is keep my own map over the full term and then adjust as things go. So where you see reading TBD, and I'm sure some of you in your fields can think about just the right thing to put there. So if you think, please tell me TBD means I have something, but I'm looking to find something better. So that's all it is. And one has to put in the disclaimer about making alterations to the official schedule. Third thing about syllabi generally is that syllabus is a desperate attempt to communicate. Everything in the syllabus is something I want students to know about the course in the first session. One of my colleagues gives students a quiz on the syllabus after the first week, and I so far have not done that, but I understand the temptation. I did once bet a class that if no one in the whole semester asked me a question that is answered to the syllabus, I would buy them all pizza. So maybe that's better than a quiz. I don't know. So everything in there is when I can tell somebody something. Yes.
Who won that bet?
I did. Now, the two syllabi, I was a little surprised that the committee seemed to want both of these, but I mean, they did go together. They're related, but they're asymmetrical. The logical relation is just the relationship between beginnings and endings. The myth of origin in terms of my teaching is that I'm teaching apocalypticism first in 2003. I think this is my first run. And I found myself having to explain, especially in regards to the apocalypse of John, that the world that gets, well, not completely destroyed, but significantly rehabbed, is the world that was believed to be created in the first place. So the cosmic structure is coherent with creationism. And I found myself also in apocalypticism having to treat the distinction between time and history and the variation in how religious traditions treat these categories. History is central in some traditions, in others history is not all that important. So through having to teach those topics in apocalypticism, I came to think about creation myths and the idea of comparing creation myths to scientific method in modern cosmology. I thought it'd be a fun thing to do. And so far I've been learned about that. The other thing that's asymmetrical about these courses is that apocalypticism does significantly focus on Judaism, Christianity, and to a lesser extent Islam, whereas the myth, science, and creation courses is wider in scope, both in its inclusion in a global palette of cosmic myths and also in its inclusion of scientific method with mytho-poetic thought. And I'm a little, the current dean of the Honors College is a physicist, so I'm still surprised that she's letting me get away with this. Surprised but happy. Regarding apocalypticism, I started doing it because I thought it would be fun. I didn't want to just do ancient apocalypticism. I wanted it to be a wide frame. Now, since I'm sort of an ancient to medieval specialist, I think I should take too much time being in the ancient world. Currently, ancient material is about a third of the course. So there's an overall historical framework. One of the challenges is what to include and what to leave out. And there's no perfect answer to that. I can tell you one other person's answer and why I don't do it. Last fall when I was on faculty leave, I spent it at Yale, so I spent some time with John Collins, one of my doctor fathers from Chicago, and I found out that he and a historian buddy were teaching a graduate course called Apocalypse in that term. And I said, how do you fit it all in? And John says, well, we just leave out the Middle Ages. And I just spit my drink. I don't know. That had never occurred to me. And I didn't like the idea we had it proposed. But that's one answer. I've not adopted that yet. I don't think I will. But selection is difficult for this course. Regarding the assignments, now, I don't much in the way of how I assign essays, and that was partly reluctance to have that material publicly available because I revise it slowly over the year. My students, but I was interested in the short assignment. So essays is a major component of the course. It's classified as writing intensive by the university, which just means at least 60% of the grade has to come from written assignments of substantive. Here's how reading students' essays in this class is what led me to the type of short assignments I give. So the assignments were responses to what I received. I can tell you what I was going for with this. This first one was about movies. I think you do that, didn't you? Yeah. And you notice the assignment just asked for a futuristic film, not necessarily an apocalyptic one. This is something I usually do on a board, is draw a timeline and then somebody who's at time step 0 and they have a thought limit. And what I want students to see with this is that for the film, right, the future that's imagined is in the thought moment, it's not on the timeline. And then any conception of the past that's articulated in the film is also in somebody's thought moment, and it may or may not coincide with what we do know of history. And I do this because I think people, especially when you're moving to the future, can confuse the thought balloon of somebody in the past with the actual future. So it was just an assignment, something to, at the early terms, to try to deal with that distinction and separation. Some of the short assignments have a lot to do with indigestion and historical criticism. People just, what I mean, not getting it. I'm never quite sure if it's, incomprehension or refusal. Sometimes a little both, I suppose. The assignment about, which one did I give? Because I just gave this to my class last week, and I'm not sure. One is called Homework Daily 5-8. What did I give you? Oh, yeah. These are 2 of the 4 questions I gave in the assignment. So I was doing something here called parallel reasoning. Something I learned from taking the LSAT. No, I've been lost. Taking the LSAT. And once given a question, a little argument, and you have to pick out the other argument that has the same structure of reasoning. So I did these, I took my students' essays, and I tried to write claims, mini theses, that would parallel the reasoning I was seeing in the essays, but not be about religion. In an attempt to get them to see that the structure of reasoning had nothing to do with, and very little to do with religious subject matter. That's what I was going for with these. And I did, when I saw my class on Tuesday, they were handing these in. I haven't read them yet, but I asked them for reactions. And somebody just said, well, referring to one of the claims, said, well, this is just stupid. Who wrote these claims? And I said, I did. I don't. And yes, I was trying to be stupid on purpose and writing things. Well, funny too, but so that's how that assignment originated. Another thing I'm doing in short assignments is just trying to find out things I wanted to know. And the visions assignment, where they have to write either a true dream, vision, or altered experience. And I do ask them not to tell me if they've done anything illegal to obtain those, or a physical one. And then I try to figure out which is which. And this is a question that's troubled me since graduate school, whether we can distinguish later on from a literary document what may be an actual vision, and when the writer may have just created one. And this is very hard to do. I had a batting average of about 60% for several years until this fall, and then I totally screwed up. So I don't know if there are any markers of this. That assignment actually was written as a response to a student question some years ago. The student asked me, how can you tell the difference between a true vision and a hallucination? And I said, well, neurobiologically, there is no difference. It seems to me it's a matter of authority as it's socially constructed. I wrote this more to provoke discussion. I don't necessarily have a direction it has to go in, but just a way to let people grapple these questions. Last thing is the UO presentations. I'm not doing this term, and that just has been judging about what I thought would be easier for me. But ordinarily, the oral presentations about contemporary apocalypticism would be the final 25% of the course. And so a lot of modern apocalyptics actually have a lot of students in this form. One topic that has always been picked by someone is Waco, which is still very much a live memory in Central Texas. Beyond that, it's been 2012, for the past couple of years, but I don't expect to see that again. And some of the students who quite artsy stuff. I've had reports on apocalyptic motifs of Bob Dylan's music and Johnny Cash and some weird bands I've never heard of. So it's that can be fun too. Sometimes as a student doesn't handle it all that well, but overall I had positive results with that. Now, that's what I wanted to say about the apocalypse and syllabus. Is there anything you wanted to ask me about it or discuss about it? Yes?
Can you actually just, is this part of the honors college, or is this, what is the size of the classroom?
The size of the classroom?
Enrollment-wise?
Religious studies are capped at 30, so apocalypticism usually is close to full and stays that way.
Okay.
About 27, I'd say. That is an important question if you're having everyone do oral presentations.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'd love to hear you reflect a little bit, if you can, with the one perspective of having done this several times, about the sort of the effect of the assignments that you created, like the one you said about the visions, to provoke discussion rather than to move toward a particular sort of set of points that you want them to take away. I mean, I think it makes a lot of sense. I think that a lot of what is kind of general, I mean, I know it's not required, but are about doing are sort of knocking down the walls rather than building up the house. But I'd love to hear you talk about sort of the effects that you think that this kind of
students?
Yeah.
I think the parallel reasoning, that's what I call it, that's what my colleague is called. I think that does have an effect. People get it in a way they don't necessarily get when I'm correcting their essays. And what it does is lower the stakes from dealing with texts many of them regard as sacred and therefore not capable of being handled in the way I may handle the Bible. And it also helps them isolate different types of questions. Now, I'm asking a question about what someone in the past thought, certain rules of evidence and analysis apply. If we're asking how someone might make it meaningful today, that's actually a different sort of question. And so different standards of argument or interpretation might apply. And whereas they tend to revert to harmonization. And although you don't have an example in this packet, I do give harmonization assignments. Often when I teach New Testament especially, I'll just give them two parallel passages and say, first part is harmonize these, create a single and things coherent. But the second part is critique your own harmonization. What choices did you have to make? Why did you make the ones you did? What did you leave out? Did you add anything? For a long time, I just wish they would just stop harmonizing it as a knee-jerk type of interpretation. And then I thought, wait, but they're going to do that anyway. Try to raise it to consciousness instead of just pushing it away. What's funny about criticism, since the ancient period just with both biblical and extra-biblical text, is sometimes seeing a student read a non-canonical text as if it were canonical, and being unaware of doing so. And this is just, I don't know, it's fascinating to ask people, why are you taking it this way? But the other thing about it is that I go in and teach them at the Apocalypse of Weeks, and everybody gets the historical inductions and how we date things the way they do. But if it's a canonical text, then suddenly the break statement. I said, well, last week you understood this. It's the same thing. So I think teaching apocalypticism brought some of those things into my awareness when I started dealing with the assignment level. An over response. Any other questions or comments on? Yes.
How do you get students to read text closely when they think they know what they say? Do you have assignments?
Maybe by getting bogged down with my new detail and talk discussion. I listened for somebody saying it means something. And then I went back to the text and say, wait, where does it say? Where are you getting that? And then that's the way you expose something. Is it coming from anything in the text? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe there's something in the text, but there's also a lot of their own addition to it. And what the case will be will depend on what the student has said. It's really just through reading short passages and discussing them with the students. So if I'm inclined to go very slow, I don't do this all the time. I'll have students read a couple of sentences and then try to say what they think it says, and then question about it. So, I mean, the brief answer to your question is close to that method.
In class.
Some people don't like that. Maybe not. Leading together, yes.
How did you coach the oral presentation assignment? Did you give them, how are they identifying resources that they're using in preparation?
Well, they have to talk to me about their topics, and so in the course of doing that, I make suggestions about what resources they should use. Especially, I do give additional guidance for using web resources. In one case, a student was doing a presentation based on something he found represented on the web, and he could not figure out if it was a real apocalyptic movement or a spook. So I perhaps leave it more up to them than I should about how much they have to come in and discuss with me. I ask them to, but without compelling them to in the form of awarding points for consultations. Sometimes people run with what they want to do and not to the state. Another thing I do with writing lately is require consultations between essays. So I will give a student back his or her essay, and we will set specific goals for that student that they can look for on the next essay, and then either give additional rewards or additional penalties if they haven't dealt with those particular issues. I keep track of it in card file. I think it's really better. Card file. Some people don't like it, but I have had students say, yeah, nobody's ever worked with me on my writing like this. Yes.
What are the grading conventions, ABC? I see you've got a description of what grades mean. What are the grading conventions in practice at your institution? How does your own grading compare to it? If there's a discrepancy, how do you handle it? Or do you find yourself grading towards the general conventions if they're different?
I know I'm one of the tougher graders in my department. I don't know how I compare institutionally.
Do you have a strict bell curve? Is that the way it works out?
No, it usually comes out that way, but I don't think I'm imposing it. I think theoretically everyone can get an A or an F. That just rarely happens. Some students are surprised at my consideration of writing. I've been told that this is not an English course, you should not grade writing. This will never persuade me, as you well know. But I think if one is upfront in the syllabus and from the first week about what the expectations are, then so far nobody's going to tell me not to do it. And it's really worth it for the several kids over the years who come to me and said, you've improved a lot because of what you prompted me to do. Not very simple.
I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit more about your interaction with John Collins and saying, no, I'm not going to get rid of the medieval stuff. Because I'm looking at your syllabus, and I guess I've been doing the quarter system for a little while, but it's just like, oh my gosh. It goes from August all the way to December, and it's got, a new topic for every single.
What's Collins have to do with this?
No, I was just saying, like in your teaching, you've got all these different things here in your syllabus, and like all this variety. How's that?
It's what I wanted to do. I couldn't. I don't think I could teach apocalyptic systems without talking about the Cold War, an apocalyptic film, or Yahoo theory. I noticed recently that I tend to design courses as a kind of big induction. If you study all this material, there are certain large inductions you're going to be in a position to make. And the students don't have to make the same ones I do. John's been teaching with a colleague, Abbas Amana, and they divide the material up based on ages that we can have a modern portion of the course. When I was there last fall, I was lobbying for them to include the strange law. They hadn't decided on the film yet, and I'm just very fond of it. And so they asked me to come and help teach that session with them, and I was pretty intimidated because I heard down the same side with John Collins. And then I realized they probably just did this so they didn't have to prep it. It was a lot of fun though. I think the material is so prolific that you could make a whole year course of it, and maybe it should be that way. But most most students aren't going to sign up for that. I think the only way they're going to get an adequate understanding of how this is in the present is to have this really long framework. Yes?
Yeah, continuing with this question, what are the advantages and disadvantages of doing this sort of topical survey? Do you find that there are students who just don't have concepts of things like Islam, for example, like these basic movements or historical moments that are foundational to this sort of integral like survey approach that you're taking to the material?
Yeah. I usually ask people in the first or second session if we've had less to consider. And often very few of them have. So if you're asking if there's a lack of historical framework, yes. On the other hand, I'd rather try to give it to them than just say, oh, I shouldn't do this because they don't come in with it. I can imagine it's like justifications for avoiding just what I was here for. Okay, yes.
I have another sort of writing question. Given that your students are coming with a vast sort of range of preparation or native ability, how do you, I mean, since you said that teaching writing winds up being a major component of what you're doing, how do you pitch it? I mean, it sounds like you do a lot of it sort of in individual consultation, but I mean, when do you take time to sort of teach basic writing skills in class, and if so, how do you pitch it?
There were a couple of semesters where I was incorporating basic writing skills as a 10-minute segment in the class. I didn't television program, but I don't know what else did. I realized that if all I do is say write an essay, prompts and guidelines, and then I get something back, and all I do is grade those. It felt too much like grading them on what they came in with, instead of trying to give them the tools to improve. And so again, does it work perfectly? No. I'd rather try to give them the opportunity for improving both their writing and thinking skills together. One of the things I do with essays is sometimes, if I have a stack of essays, I'll pull sentences out of the essays and then write up a sheet with just no observation. By the time I'm in class, I've forgotten this year. And I pick good ones, bad ones, and middling ones. And then I ask the students to rate the sentences of 1, 2, 3. Good says they're bad. And every time I've done this, there's been a high level of consensus from the students about whether it's a good sentence, a substantive sentence, or a bad sentence. And then we talk about why they're such the way they do. So this, removes it from the notion that I just have, sophisticated grammar rules that I'm imposing on them. And I try to link writing with thought. One of the characteristics of so-so sentences is that they say something, but often the real meaning of them is embedded in subordinate clauses or prepositional phrases rather than being in the key subject, verb, object slots of the sentence. I mean, it's that grammar of thinking. I don't know. I'm not sure there's a distinction in that phase.
And using their own essays in class, does that sort of give it more punch, or does it make something defensive?
It turns out some people, frankly, but many of them do respond to it. It's frankly, it's a kind of attention. I think some of them never gotten it. They're surprised by it and they start to like it. I can only do this because my classes are relatively small. I cannot do this with a class of 50. It does make a lot of work for me, but it's they're not trying. Are you ready to move on to the mid-science information? Okay.
Just a small question on page 2. You ever have anyone ask you to define dishonest mental compartmentalization?
No. Not yet.
Well, I just did. Obviously this paragraph, or the whole method of the course paragraph is a crucial thing. Do you discuss that the first day?
Oh, yes.
Do you, and then, but also, what do you mean by dishonest mental compartmentalization?
I mean a student who is concealing his or her settled convictions in an attempt to get a grade. I would rather have them be honest about what their convictions are and then work with that. That's really all I did.
Can you think of an example or 700 of where that's come to play in your teaching? Have you ever had to call someone on it, or?
Not recently. The way it comes up most frequently, I think, is in class, a certain verbal tag off before certain comments, and it's some people said. And then what comes after that is something that I have a feeling is what the student thinks, but they're too afraid to say that to me or to the rest of the class. I think we should all own where we're coming from. And I realize what I'm about to say is very un-Buddhist, but I think there should be no thoughts without a thinker. A thought is coming from someone who's somewhere or some way, and it applies to people in the classroom as much as to documents in the past. And so that's what I'm trying to get around. But, now that you draw my attention to that, I think it's been a while since that reared its head in a particularly vivid form.
Is this also giving them language to talk to one another?
Absolutely.
Did they say to each other, what do you mean, some people say? How's the classroom conversation vis-a-vis ownership of this method and expectation of it from one another?
It works better if students ask each other questions like that, frankly. I did one time at the end of the competencies class when I was doing oral presentations. There was a young man who was clearly committed to a certain version of the cognitive expectation. His presentation, he was talking about some movement that, whose ideas he was not sharing. He was snarky about it. And one of the other students said, but wait a minute, how can you pick on these people when you believe X? And I was so glad a student said that instead of me. But it was a good question. And he answered. So I'd rather see that conflict down. I do have a lot of students who come in expecting a religious studies class to be a faith group. And so, can I say something like, I try to be really hard-ass on the first day. You can try to dress, I was always wear one of my tough suits, so I like to look like I'll throw people out of the window. And then some people leave after the first day. I do mean what I say on the first day. It's just that early on in my teaching career, I had a couple of students who were just not on board and took their mission in the class to be to save the rest of the class from me. And so I don't want to fight anybody for control of the class. They will lose. But in the course of the term, I'll get control, and then, so I don't, I do try to detach what their commitments are from the types of assignments I ask them to do. I don't assign anything where anybody has to say what they believe is going to do, or where that has to enter into their arguments as a premise or a conclusion. There have been cases where people misread assignments or questions in that way. The one that comes to mind is an identification question. I think all I said was state the Orthodox doctrine of the Incarnation. And someone wrote, it's a lot more complicated, but somebody wrote, human beings are inherently sinful, and so God sent Jesus to die on the cross, an atonement for our sins, and if we believe in Jesus, we'll go to heaven on judgment. And there was this donut hole right where the doctrine of the Incarnation was supposed to be. So, how do I'm not sure what's going on. I think somebody's reading the question as confession of faith. But I did point out also on first stage fields that I'm not grading anybody's faith. How could I do that? I don't know. I'm not, if they include it as a member of who they are, that's fine, but it doesn't have to be here for any assignments. Anything else on this one? Okay. Mid-science and creation. My idea, footnote, my title. The Honors College requires professors to go through a proposal process, and in the course of discussing this with the Honors Committee, well, they did not want a title that had the word cosmology in it, for one thing. So this was actually Honors editing of the title. I conferred, and I don't know what my experience was. What did I know about this one? I've been using Robert Spruill's book, and I wish there were a better alternative. If anyone knows about one, please tell me. But about half the course is a global survey. I usually start with African material, then go to the Pacific Rim, the Americas, the ancient Near East. I situate the Greeks at the pivot point from cosmogony to scientific method, because it seems to me that's where the linchpin is. When we shift from mythology to science, although we can probably type those categories, I make them read sections of Aristotle on physics and on the heavens. I make them read parts of Ptolemy. And Galileo, who was a much more exciting writer than Aristotle or Ptolemy. But what I want them to see is people attempting to make observational, non-mythical arguments for a cosmic model that was incorrect, at least as far as our current state of knowledge goes. And from there, I branch out into the development of modern cosmology, which I think mainly a history of science type of approach. But one of the themes that always ends up being central is the motion of the Earth. And I ask classes, do any of you believe the Earth is stationary? And so far, nobody has said they do. Although a couple of years ago, there was a Gallup poll that found that 20% of Americans believe that the sun revolves around the Earth. So I think the Galileo is actually relevant. And here's the thing, though. I don't want students to think that ancient peoples were dumb. Observationally, the Earth certainly seems stationary from our experience of it. So, you have this nearly universal consensus among myths of civilizations that were not in contact with each other that the Earth does not move. We'd say, why? You could make a fallacious field majority opinion and say because it doesn't move. You'd say, what is everybody looking at and feeling that leads to that conclusion? So I think by the time we get to biblical material, since they seem to have a handle on their material in a way that I think is empathetic, because I'm trying to think, what could ancients observe and how would they think about it? I have had students tell me that Genesis 1 and 2 seem very different read in this context. So usually I don't have to be too heavy-handed with comparing the two creation stories or with relating to other material, because by that time students can pretty much do it themselves. Let's see. The funny thing is, they all believe the Earth moves, but they can't tell me why. And so it's a useful starting point to say, well, look, why do you believe that? Do you believe it simply on the basis of authority? This is what you've been told since childhood. Or do you know what observations lead to the conclusion that the Earth moves? We talk about more than the motion of the Earth, but clearly the overall shape of the cosmos, the spatial relationships, time relationships, and the origin and place of the human being in the cosmic structure. But but somehow, for some reason, motion of the earth, it gets a lot of recurrent address in the class. Now, another thing about the hard part of this course is not what I thought it would be. What I thought it would be is teaching biblical material. I also teach that along with later, usually sections of Rava and parts of Augustine from the last part of Confession, so they can see how ancients interpreted those texts in ways other than literalism they may be aware of from our public culture. What's hard about it instead is slogging them through Aristotle, Ptolemy, and Galileo. So that surprised me. I think they tend to find the Ptolemaic sections just boring rather than, so that does become a type of session where we go very slowly. So what does he say here, and then drawing things on the board. I did a drawing assignment. It's like usually tell them to draw the cosmic structure in the Middle East. And some of those have been really cool. Like we get an RC type of student to do that. Now, the debate assignment is, that's always been fun. If you're wondering how I came up with this, I debated in high school. And I was a speech major. So I wanted to do this because I thought it would lower the stakes about opinions they may hold dear and opinions they may think are silly if people had to make a case for something that they may feel is counterintuitive. That's what I was going for. It worked very well in a way that turned out to be funny than I didn't anticipate it. The first time I did this course, 4 different groups had chosen to debate one of the early myths. Somebody was doing the cosmic egg myth. Somebody was doing Bumba's vomit. You know that one, the Vishana with the Bumba's vomit? That's a good one. The cosmos started with the one male god Bumba vomiting out with the sun, moon, and stars, and then various archetypes of animal species and human beings. And a couple of others like that. And one thing, the groups were not, I'm convinced they were not working with each other, but what happened was every affirmative, meaning everyone who was arguing for the myth, basically accepted modern science as we know it and offered an allegorical interpretation of the myth. And so here's what, I'm listening to 2 students debate this, and the student says this, right? And one of the problems in development of modern cosmology was why light and matter are not evenly distributed throughout the observable cosmos. And so the student said that, that the Big Bang says that the universe started with a single large eruption, and so this is like Bumba vomiting, and this is why things are in clumps instead of uniforms. I wish I had a tape of this. So this is elaborate metaphorical justification of the Vishnu myth. And the others were similar, but not that quite that funny. And so once these 4 different groups had presented it, I could then link them and ask them, look, you all chose this strategy. Were you aware that this is what we were doing? And any of them were. Nobody attempted a literal defense of the myth. Sometimes they have picked the one about the cosmos all started at 10 o'clock this morning, which raises some interesting philosophical questions about the reality of the past. And that does have a strong with Descartes' evil genius as well. So now that's how it's worked. I've done it twice, once as an honors, once as a regular religious studies course, and it's currently something to be on the docket for an India study abroad this summer if I get enough students. Any questions or comments about that one? Yes.
I have a question about the creative project.
Oh, okay.
Which you assigned. What led to the inclusion of a creative project for your alongside this research paper and philosophical essay? I was like, what led to that? And doesn't it seem to use different skills than you would be encouraging in the research paper or the philosophical essay? And then finally, how do you grade it?
Yes. I'm trying to give students a way to play to their strengths. Since my courses draw a cross-section, I want them to have that flexibility. Everybody's project has to be approved by me, so I usually only permit creative projects for students whose expository writing I don't need to see more of. If someone still needs to work on expository writing, I won't let them do the creative project. The other stricter I have on that is that they have their prior training in Art 1. So it's not, you know, an assignment where someone who's never written poetry will have an epic. I would say no. But I mean, in addition to being a scholar, I'm also a writer and heavily engaged in the arts. And I have some of my students are creative writing English majors or musicians or visual artists. And as part of that project, I also have them write something reflecting on the process of artistic engagement with the traditional method. So there is an analytical component to it. Some of those projects have been wonderful. I mean, like anything, it doesn't always work. I think of a colleague and friend who's at Texas State who would particularly disapprove of this, but you know, does it require different things of different people? Yes, I've always viewed it as letting people choose their path of greatest strength as long as they are meeting more baseline academic requirements. Yes. Yes.
It seems like the creation of syllabus involves a lot of like trying things and then figuring out, well, that didn't quite work, and like revising it.
Yeah.
So what are for either of these two? What are some things that you had to discard or modify from experience? Like what's left on the cutting room floor in the creation of these syllabi?
Well, I've given up just saying write an essay. My idea of a reasonable reading load and my students' idea is very different. I've been teaching for quite a while. By the time I did the mythology science appreciation course with apocalypticism, I used to give very regular quizzes, and I stopped doing that. And this, I have a critical mass of students who just aren't reading assignment session to session, and that does happen. Quiz structure can provide both the carrot and the stick, just for getting people to read from session to session. I don't think it does quite enough though, because I want students to understand why you have to remember the date when something was composed, if you know, and who wrote it and where you were. So I've gotten away from quizzes, and I also used to give more multiple choice tests than I do now. Students at Texas State like multiple choice tests, but they don't work well with the type of courses I teach, and I didn't feel like I was finding out what I needed to know. So I really use that, but I use that sparingly. Can't think of anything else. Yes?
I have a question about the way that you measure progress for students on the goals that you set out at the beginning of the syllabus. If you have these multiple assignments with these kinds of logically oriented or writing oriented goals, and if you have a student who starts out maybe pretty decent at composing logical arguments and presenting them analytically, do you then focus more on just acquisition of the content of the course, or do you try to also maintain that where you're looking for everyone to improve and you have some kind of way of checking?
The latter. I have had students who come in with adequate analytical skills that they're looking for. Those are the cases where I work in more heavily into secondary literature, where we would discuss writing at a higher order of developing their style. I can think of once, well, she's on the exchange term right now, but is an aspirant to graduate school. And if they tell me, you know, when people tell me they want to go to graduate school, I do my best to discourage them. And this doesn't work though. We go anyway. So with those students, I do consciously start coaching in sports on a good writing statement for graduate applications and doing the sort of work that I know I'm going to need to talk about in letters I write for them. So if the class is small enough, yes, I can also tailor it that way, where students who come in with what I'm already asking for can deal with more material and deal with it at a higher order than other students. What do you discourage them? Well, you could ask your predecessor to tell me my life story.
I have.
I don't want them to think it's an easy thing to do. It's not. And I don't want to delude anybody into what graduate school is actually like or what the job market is like. I would feel grossly irresponsible if I felt I was being overly optimistic. I never say I won't help you. I do help them a lot. But I think that I'm perhaps also reacting to institutional pressures. As if any colleague in a different department who had a student, I used to be very sort of project. The student was very talented, but was struggling in some ways. And my colleague in the department wanted us to sort of both jointly sit on him and get him to apply to graduate school. And the young man's other possible ambitions were being a fiction writer or a welder. And I don't think it's necessarily better to be an academic than a welder who writes fiction. And you can't outsource welding. So I think I have resisted the impulse to just make clones of ourselves. I mean, not that I think it's anything bad. I wouldn't still be doing it myself, and I have seriously considered alternatives many times. Not recently, but why? Do you guys think it's bad to discourage people from going to grad school? Yes, go to grad school. It's heaven.
Do you encourage anyone to do that? Have diet root beer, it's heaven. I mean, do we ever encourage people that everything is perfect? I mean, I kind of want to encourage and say, but this is what it's going to, this is what it takes. This is, a reasonable expectation.
Well, I have students who seem to have unreasonable expectations about where they could get in, about how much it would cost them, and how you would fund it. And so I think it is important to try to remove, expectations that are demonstrably unrealistic. And by demonstrably, I mean I could point them to data. I suppose the rest of the answer to that question may simply be too personal. I'm sorry,
but one thing though that you did mention is that your institution is a Hispanic serving institution. And one of the questions for higher education in this country is how are the educators reflective of the population of this country? And so I don't want to lead you into this, but I mean, if you have really outstanding students, have you ever said, hey, you're really good at this?
I compliment, the flip side of that is I can think of a couple of students who I think were students for whom I would say in a letter, they're as smart as anybody I went to school with here. And they thought about going for grad school and chose not to. And often this had to do with personal or social or economic circumstances. So I don't want to communicate to anyone that if you're not in the academy, you're just not living the best life.
This is actually very much a related question. I want to take a cue from your syllabus where you talk about affirmative statements. Could you say affirmatively what it is that your goals are for your students as a teacher and to what extent those are related to the particular institution that you're working at?
Okay. Most of my students are going to get a bachelor's degree and go into the workforce somehow. The religion minor does tend to draw students from whose majors are history, anthro, philosophy, psychology. The public ignorance of religions is appalling, I think, and so one of our best options is to try to ameliorate that. So I do want students to know more about the history of religions, especially the ones that have most influenced this civilization. Some of my students come in thinking there are only two options, and that's to be either a very conservative literalist or an atheist. And so I would like them to know there are other ways of viewing religious phenomena than those two. And I'd like them to have more cultural fluency. A better way of imagining the other. Trying to use documents and artifacts and details to try to vividly imagine what it's like to be someone else. We can never do that perfectly, but attempting is better than not trying, I think. And, sometimes I've had students who seem unable to imagine why someone else who's born in some other part of the world and grown up in a different type of civilization might like the way they are. And find it is emotionally compelling as we find whatever our origins or bigotry one other detail I probably am not fully addressing in a structural way that I need to work on is this. A couple of years ago, the legislature passed a law that requires public high schools, to offer a Bible elective if there is sufficient demand for the class to be taught. And this was adopted at a time, I think it was actually before the University of Texas at Austin had their Department of Religion. So we're talking about a legislative requirement when the state had no infrastructure for training teachers to teach it. And Mark Chansey at SMU did a study of what was actually happening in these classrooms, and the results were pretty dismal. The UT's got its department now, but Texas State trains the majority of teachers who go on to teach in Texas public schools. So one thing that's in my department's new 5-year plan, because I'm often put there, is a way to try to address training for teachers who might go be either social studies teachers or English teachers, I suppose, to be able to address religious studies, especially biblical studies. Other questions or comments?
I have a question. I found your sheet on how to do your best in this course really interesting. I wondered if there were students who found it insulting or obvious. And were there students who said, I already know how much work I need to do, I already know how to read? Or was this really revelatory to the vast majority of your students in an honors course?
They're wrong about that. The students I have tend to overestimate rather than underestimate their prior background. One comment I saw recently, I teach in the honors humanities sequence. Humanities is actually overseen not by honors but by a foreign language professor who comes to know with surprise is also an alumna of UC Berkeley. These courses are co-taught. And so I was co-teaching with an English colleague, and we were doing the close readings of grant discussion today with some pretty meaty stuff. And one thing that showed up on our evaluations was a student who said, the professor should have just told us what it meant. I didn't like listening to other students talk about it. I thought that was so insulting to their peers. I don't remember who this was anymore, who said, well, I didn't know because the evaluations were anonymous. But one thing I try to encourage is a better respect for the process of slogging through it, struggling to find something.
Well, my question is, as we all go to teach in a variety of institutions,
yes,
how do we gauge at what level we create sheets like this or don't, right? Because I've been at institutions where my professors have grossly underestimated the capacity of students, and it's really demoralizing. And I've also been in the converse. And so how do you gauge, does it just come through years of teaching that you see a general trend of what students need to hear, or do you have any advice as we construct our own syllabi, how to gauge at what level we engage our students?
There are certain assignments I give that I think of as diagnostic, just for that purpose, finding out where people are. And I try to do those early on. And then make whatever adjustments I need to. Students who are already quite accomplished, I can work with more individually on their goals. But that's a hard thing about teaching. I don't have a perfect answer to it. You have a group of 30 people, they all have different levels of preparation, different abilities, and different reasons why they're doing different things about what they're willing to do and not do. And that just comes with the territory. So gauging is a matter of finding out where the critical mass seems to lie and addressing that. And then within that framework, addressing the outliers as you can.
I seem a little off topic, but any issue with the difference between teaching at a private and a state-run institution?
I don't know. I'm not taught at private university.
What's it just from your experience of what you may have taught here? Which probably answers my question.
I taught one class at the university. Once a session, yes. What about?
No, I'm just wondering if you noticed any differences. Having never been to a
Well, private schools don't have to pay attention a whole lot to the legislature. That strikes me as the biggest one. I think the job of a public university president is very political and becoming more so. And I do not envy the people who are doing those jobs. I think since my commitment within religious studies is very clear to methodological naturalism, that works well with a public university and its need to operate within the First Amendment. Of course, the Supreme Court has never actually addressed university level. Who knows? I'm trying to think what my colleagues have been elsewhere. What discussions with colleagues have you? I have a friend and colleague in St. Edwards in Austin, and we both guest taught sessions of each other's courses, and she's been incredibly positive about mine. And I thought teaching a session of Heraclitus class was a lot of fun, and part of what we're indulging in is just grass is always doing this, and so I would become aware that that's what we're doing, and put it in perspective. But yeah, I don't want to say private schools don't have political pressures, they do, but public universities are under rather concerted political pressures and budget pressures right now. Yes?
Back to the question about the different kinds of students you get, preparation, background, and interest in the subject matter. How does that affect grading? Do you have a particular, I'm looking at your note on grades, do you have a particular standard? This is clearly coming from my own sort of problems. Do you grade according to a standard or according to improvement on an individual level?
That's probably a more difficult question for me in philosophy classes. So beyond, I shorten those reading assignments. I try to reassure them that I was not born knowing how to read Kant either. I don't know if that makes anybody feel any better. I have had students come in and just say, I'm not getting this. It's hard to read this material. So part of it is trying to prepare them for reading material that's different from what they've encountered previously. And the type of attention you have to engage to read, especially philosophy. I do try to link it to everyday interests and concerns. And certainly the film The Matrix has been an enormous help in teaching me art. Sometimes I've had students in my office say, I don't understand it. And it's hard to respond to that because I need something more particular to start with. So what I will do is pick out passage in a recent session's reading have them read it to me out loud, and then paraphrase it sentence by sentence, and then ask them questions depending on what happens. I've seen all kinds of different reactions to this. I've seen one student said, well, gee, this is just common sense. Once you got it. In one case, a student whom I had offered to see weekly to do just this said that declined the offer and said she found a friend who was just going to explain it to her. And I'm very disturbed by farming out one's reading to secondary sources in this matter, to Wiki or the internet, or I guess put notes of red right now. So I've had students ask me to recommend just that type of secondary sources, things that offer them digest so that they read that instead of the original. And I don't make recommendations. I try to explain why I think they need to engage it on their own and offer to help them. The university also has a writing center and something called SLAC, and I'm not remembering what the full acronym is. Learning and Access Center, something like that. But it's figures people. Others? Yes.
I'm curious about your selection of required reading for your syllabi. Is your institution one that really strongly encourages one or two major textbooks for each class with very little supplementary articles? Can you do course packets? I've noticed that you essentially have 2 or 3 primary text requirements that work throughout the entirety, chapter by chapter, through most of your classes. How does that work?
I think it's probably atypical about my career from the get-go. Many things, but this is just one of them. Up until last year, I was the only religious studies scholar there, and so my philosophy colleagues really don't tell me a whole lot about what they want me to do. So I on the one hand, it's lonely. On the other hand, I can do what I want to. So that applies as well to things like textbook selection and curriculum design. I don't like textbooks. I've tried using them in world religions and other courses, and I never find textbooks satisfying. So I prefer to draw on what I think of as real books, and have students grapple with those. There are students who come in with an expectation of textbook. Now, one of the pressures we're under, and this is one I like actually, is to try to reduce the cost for the students in textbook purchase. This may be too political. I think textbook companies really have higher rate of barrel. Because in trying to lower costs for students, I try to order older editions of books and be told by the bookstore that I can't have those. I have to order the new one that costs twice as much, and I hope that makes up these books. But I'd rather have them deal with primary material in smaller doses, and then provide the secondary framework myself in the course design. Than these textbooks. With the apocalypticism, there is no textbook I know of for what I'm doing. The reddish volume, I think, just went out of print. Again, still in print. And there's no source I've been able to find that collects material from the modern and contemporary period. And if there were, I might not like it.
So that's something
nobody's telling me how to use textbooks, which ones, and that could happen. Now, in the philosophy intros, the main thing that's required is that we teach critical thinking, and that includes certain basics about argumentation and informal fallacies. But beyond that, everyone has quite a lot of latitude. Yes.
That actually sets up a question I was wondering about, because I think both of these syllabi are really. I love that they have such a broad scope. I think they're really exciting, and I admit I tried to Google you and figure out what your training had been in here, and I couldn't figure it out.
Well, I'm trying to have fun.
Well, yes, no, that's so obvious, and I think it's really exciting. But I would love to hear you talk about sort of what. I mean, I guess not having a lot of colleagues or any colleagues makes it a little easier because it means you're responsible for sort of whatever happens. But can you talk a little bit about sort of the sources other than your training in this building, in terms of sort of the authority to put together the courses that you do? The subtext is embolden us, please.
Well, I was a pre-med for a while at Northwestern, and I have ongoing engagement, especially with biological science and physics. And so part of the design for the science and creation is definitely coming from that background of ongoing interest. Now I remember a fellow grad student here telling me that it was rather weird how much I knew everything in chemistry. I've forgotten it all by now, but no, something about the way you asked the question. You see, I think part of my intellectual enthusiasm all along has been seeking deep connections among the different fields of knowledge. You know, so if you just look at the motto of this university, there's something about me, and I was this way before I came here, and that's probably why I came here, that is about that, and continually re-examining things at a fundamental level, and putting things into dialogue that you might not expect. One day when I was in period of just feeling out of sorts here, I remember going into John Collins' office and saying, I don't know if I belong here. And his reply was, Prescott's the end here. And that was about the extent of the conversation. Okay. But I've always wanted to, I had trouble narrowing things down. I had trouble settling on a program and designing it in a way. I still think to this day that I should have taken 7 or 8 qualifying exams instead of just 5. But I didn't think to ask anybody if time to let me do that. And there's a lot that I could not get into even something as flexible as the religion and literature program here. So that's where it's all coming from. Consistently, since I started teaching my students and setting the evaluations, that I convey a great enthusiasm for learning and enthusiasm for their learning. And it's something I'm not even aware of trying to convey. I don't, well, any more than intimidating people, I'm also told I do that. You know, I don't say how can I be enthusiastic and how can I intimidate people. Did you want to say something?
No.
Okay. I can talk briefly about the NIH project and a bachelor's proposal. These are actually separate things. A couple of years ago, the history department hired a South Asian specialist who's the NIH religious studies. So once we were both tenured, we set out to propose a bachelor's program. And we hope to put that proposal through this year, working on the curriculum design now. The NEH Distinguished Teaching Professorship is a temporary chair. Back in the 90s, I think most of we started, NEH was endowing distinguished teaching professorships at local institutions and visiting chairs. And I did not seek this out. It was September, and I was still settling into New Haven when my chair emailed me and said he wanted to nominate me for this. And so I had to spend about 10 days working up the proposal, including collecting teaching material that I could much more easily have obtained when I was still in Boston. But did anyone say that then? So yeah, I was actually very grumpy about it. The timing was not good. Once I started writing the thing, I thought, gee, it'd be really fun to do this stuff. Given some peculiar histories about how religious studies is perceived locally in my institution, I didn't think I would get this. It was a surprise. And when I wrote it, what I thought to myself was this: there's no religion major, and let's suppose there's not going to be one. Let me just pretend that nothing happens with this proposal. What can I do within the structure of the 3-year NEH project to make something stick in the community? And so I tried to come up with ideas that would put something there that could be ongoing. And so in some of the curricular design especially in the humanities sequence and philosophy's dialogue class. Like, the dialogue class is integrated with something called the dialogue series, which runs semester-long class. And features weekly topics. The topics include both student-led dialogues for the students in the class and dialogues from guest speakers, including local faculty and visitors brought in. I've been teaching the dialogue class in summer for several years now. It's an advanced philosophy class. So joining, there's somebody who usually teaches a long semester, so I did have to say to my chair, these those of you and someone's going to be willing to let me do this in the long term if I get this. And so I had to ask permission for that at the writing stage. The second year project of being a faculty seminar, I think would be particularly important. Years ago, I tried to start having grab bag lunches with faculty to deal with religious studies in some way, and a few people came, and then nobody came, and everybody's busy. And so I think if it's part of this project, and if I can budget for people's stipends, more people will come. Also, I can buy them lunch. I think I can do that. So now, although the associate dean who's in charge of this chair and actually knows all the details about how it runs, has not specifically instructed me to engage the community outside the university. I think part of the spirit of what the Humanities does is community engagement. So I have already this term done some work at San Marcos Public Library last week. I was talking to a group of people in the community about religious studies, using something out of literary care school, something that might still be on the list here. So it's coming out of a public teaching function where I'm addressing students and colleagues and the larger community. And I mean, the strange thing is, so it's a title and it comes with a budget, but in a way it's what I was trying to do all along. So, and what I think religious studies scholars generally need to do, I was probably trusting to it more so than people who go into teaching in a religion department, because I was the only person there to articulate what it was and why it was helpful. So I'm really glad now my chair made me do this. And also, so the selection for it is primarily from external reviewers who then report back to the university their rankings. And so I don't know who these people were or how I happened to come out on top. It does have to be confirmed by the dean, provost, and president. So that reflected, I think, an openness to religious studies in Texas State, but more so than I've seen in the past. So that was great too. The bachelor's proposal, I was told by the dean in charge of the NEH chair that I can't do things like use the NEH money to pay a agreement where we say, here's what we need for a religious studies major. So these have to be separate. On the other hand, any programming I do in religious studies is making a case. I don't have to say that or do anything to link it to a proposal. And even if nothing happens with the proposal, it's still public and community teaching about religious studies. So in a way they're distinct. And the thing about the bachelor's proposal is I'm trying to do something based on existing resources, because if I do something attached to a major line, it will be shot down for funding reasons. And I think we've reached the point where there's a critical mass of what needs to be there to do something. There's also a precedent for it at the University of Texas at Austin, which in 2000 established a bachelor's degree in religious studies without having a department of religion. And, I've been forced to think in ways outside of the department or the major, and most of you probably won't have to, but I think it's important to think of it outside of these structures we're so accustomed to. Because I know it's never going to be a department, so what do I want to do given that that's not on the table? At least not for any future I can see. So this is what I'm trying to do. This NEH project that I hope will create something that's going to stay with the students in the community and the faculty, and also at the same time make this curricula proposal and see what happens with that. So, questions or comments about that aspect? I don't feel old enough to have anything that has the word distinguished in it. I also don't feel distinguished enough. But it is, I don't want to seem ungrateful. I'm delighted and surprised to have that opportunity. It's been interesting and, I guess we're 8 or 9 Yes?
I was wondering, you mentioned that you would teach in the context of the university, but then you also do some of these community engagement with religious studies. Thinking from my perspective of that I'm an MDiv student, and at least as I imagine it now, most of my teaching will be more in a community sort of context, like a religious institution or that sort of thing. In what ways did your thinking about teaching that topic, that subject matter, shift as you moved out of the university context and into the community context?
For me, it doesn't. For you as a future minister, it might be, because I do think the pastoral function is distinct from what I do. But some people blend them well. I don't think I have that aptitude. What shifts about it? I'm not sure. I mean, undergraduates who are majors in something else are a subset of the public to start out with. And the vast majority of mine aren't going to become scholars of religion. So I think even just teaching undergraduates is making a public address. So how is it engaging to people who may just take one course in it? And so in that way, it's not that different from community outreach, doing dialogues at the library or programming to which the communities questions may come from community members. But in terms of being a minister, I feel utterly inadequate to address that. I have no ministerial balance at all.
Is thinking also about like the scope of what you want to accomplish, which you each of those groups and that sort of thing as well.
Yeah, well, I hope is that students and anyone who attends events can balance feeling positive about what their commitments are, without that inherent negativity about others and their commitments. And maybe that is also applicable to a pastoral function. Can't think of anything else. Other comments or questions or discussion?
Well, I think we've seen a lot of distinction display. I mean, what you described about infectious enthusiasm for intellectual work, for study of religion, for engaging students. The question you don't have to answer, but that's on everyone's minds, is how many office hours a week do you have? Because,
if every student took me up on every offer I made, I'd have to give up sleeping. Not everybody accepts. How many office hours? I'm contractually obligated to have 5 a week, so I clear that minimum. Email, I think, has really changed how we relate with students. Because when I was in college, email existed, but it was used mainly by hardcore geeks in the Defense Department. And then by the time I was here, it was becoming quite common. But emailing a professor at 2 o'clock in the morning was just not done in the 1980s. There's the internet aspect of availability. One thing I try to do, And I mean, this works better because I don't have kids. I do all my teaching related stuff in my office and on campus, and all my research related stuff at home or in the libraries. Now, I have to get a junior colleague who's got a 4-year-old, and he has to do his research at work. So it works for me to maintain that distinction. I mean, I think for my book and my other articles, not only did I not write anything in the office, I didn't read anything going in the office. So those are boundaries that work for me.
It's been a memorable conversation. Really beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. It's been a delightful. Yeah.